Are ready to go.
Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you I do not yet know, my name is Jessi. My Dharma name is Shozo. I do not prefer to use my Dharma name at this time, but it is in existence and it is part of, my nature. Um, I had been sitting zazen one day and decided that I needed to talk about Zen and mental health. Why? I don't know. Because then I said, oh shit, what am I going to talk about? I had this rough idea in my head about what it is, but there were two reasons primarily that I felt this was an important topic. One, it's how I came to Buddhism in the first place, is through my mental health practice. I have been a mental health therapist for 23 years now, which is a crazy amount of time if if people think about that. Um, and the other thing is, in the last year, a teacher whom I very much respected said to me, I don't know that people with mental health issues can be helped through Zen. To which I said, I don't like that. um, for a lot of reasons. One, because I think if that were the case, then Zen probably wouldn't have any practitioners, or at least not very many. Um, because many people have mental health issues. And while there are some cautions, and Zen practice is not necessarily the only way to help those mental health issues, I would not discourage someone from doing Zen practice simply because they're struggling with mental health. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I even came into Buddhism. Again, that is one of the my mental health practice, was one of those ways. When I graduated college or with grad school in 2003, I we all had to like pick a favorite theory that was our point of view from how we practice. And at the time, and this is probably still mostly true, I was very firm. I was a cognitive behavioral therapist. I believe that the way you think and the way you feel and your behavior are all connected, and I still believe that. However, with a little asterisk, because I think CBT as a client of mine recently said, I think CBT is a really good way to gaslight yourself, um, if it's done wrong. Because I do believe that you can change your thinking. I do believe that you can influence your feelings by changing the way you think. I do believe that changing both can influence your behavior. I don't necessarily think that taking and reframing a thought is always the healthiest thing to do because it's not always real, right? And so I think that a lot of times, especially as AI has come into mental health, um, algorithms are very good at saying, okay, reframe that, and like just say the opposite of whatever you're thinking. Okay, but if that's not true, then yes, my client is right. You can really gaslight yourself, right? Um, and so through as most therapists do, we all tend to evolve. We pick and choose from different areas, and we just kind of start incorporating them all. So while primarily I would still consider myself a cognitive behavioral therapist, I'm very eclectic in the way I work. It's not a one size fits all thing by any means. It just does not work. In about, I think it was 2016, 2015, doesn't matter, around that time, I was given the opportunity to study and learn about dialectical behavior therapy. And let me tell you why that changed my life. Dialectical behavior therapy um, was developed in like the late 60s or early 70s, something like that, by Dr. Marsha Linehan, who herself has said that she struggled with addiction, self-harm behaviors. She developed it specifically because she felt that her issues were not met by traditional psychotherapy of that time. some 1970s encounter groups just were not the way, to help somebody who's cutting their wrists. So she went and she lived in a Zen monastery for, I don't even know how long, a number of years. And throughout that process, she developed dialectical behavior therapy. And so DBT at its root is still cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's also backed by behavioral science, how to change behavior, acceptance strategies, mindfulness practices, dialectical philosophy, and then several principles from Zen Buddhism, what I'm getting. And so once I started to learn about DBT, I actually went to my boss at the time. I said, I'm not really learning anything because these are things I already do. And he's like, yeah, I know. That's why I sent you to this training, because you already know it. You just need to have like the training to be official, because, that's how we do things in our field. Right. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good, because I'm already doing these things. I might have learned a few new terminology things or that kind of thing. But one of the things that really stuck with me, though, is this concept of how did Zen Buddhism influence Marshall Linehan in the development of this particular practice, and how can I use that to help my clients? And so the biggest thing, my biggest takeaway was the concept of radical acceptance. And it's something that is probably, in my opinion, not focused on enough by mental health practitioners, of that you just have to accept things as they are. Like, that doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't mean that you condone it, it doesn't mean that you just give a free pass to things. It's, you just accept that it is what it is, right? And I think also that phrase, it is what it is, has gotten very much a negative connotation in our society right now, because people just kind of use it as a way to absolve themselves of responsibility and that kind of thing. And that's, again, a downside to some of this, right? Like, is it true acceptance, or is it just avoiding stuff again, right? So that whole concept of radical acceptance and just accepting things as they are without judgment, that judgment comes later, but accepting things as they are to be able to tackle that issue in therapy especially is really important, because it helps to cut through some of that denial and through some of that anger and some of that difficulty letting go, I guess, is where that is. It's just like, you can just acknowledge that this is what happened, right? And mindfulness is one of the core skills that Dr. Linehan decided that clients needed to learn, especially for somebody who is self-harming or dealing with addiction or has personality disorder, because or has experienced a lot of trauma, because a lot of times that mind-body connection is broken. And so understanding the mind-body connection, along with accepting it is what it is, and then also the middle path, not giving into that black and white thinking, that all or nothing, that it has to be one way or the other, that two things seemingly opposite can exist at the same time and be true at the same time. That is a very difficult concept for people to understand in our society, especially. But it's also incredibly important to healing when you can say, I'm doing the best that I can right now, and I need to make some changes. And to say, I can be strong and I can ask for help. That's my problem. Or someone can love me and still disappoint me, right? Those things can all exist together in the same space. But a lot of times in our society, we are told we need to see it from one point of view or the other. You can't possibly see both. I tend to annoy the crap out of my therapist because I always see things from both sides and always have. That's a whole other thing for my own my own stuff. But, again, as I started to put these things into practice and learn DBT and put them into practice with my own clients, I also realized I needed to start practicing some of them myself. Let go of some of my own control issues, some of the things that I had been struggling with and dealing with. And so that practice of compassion, and especially self-compassion, really became, a big thing. And so as I started implementing this for myself, I needed to learn more. I needed to understand why this worked, right? It wasn't enough for me that it worked. I needed to know why. I needed to understand the research behind it. So I started reading, as I tend to do. Not that books are everything, but they are a lot. And I came across, a couple good books. One is called Dharma by Rick Hanson. And so it blends neuroscience and Buddhist wisdom to show how we can intentionally shape the brain to experience lasting well-being and inner peace. The core premise of this is that the brain is plastic, which in neuropsychology means it can be changed. So our mental habits physically reshape the brain. And they've shown this through like EEGs and PET scans, that kind of thing, is the things that we do, if we do them often enough, physically change the way that our synapses communicate with one another. So that's how habits can be formed. That's how habits can be broken. It happens naturally in toddlers and teenagers. They have the most neural connections that they will ever have in those two particular times of their lives. And that's why I say that toddlers and teenagers often act the same because they have so much going on in their brains. And it's amazing that any human survives either of those stages. Because if you think about it, right, like both toddlers and teenagers are super curious and reckless and impulsive, and they just need to know everything. And man, thank goodness they have adults, usually, hopefully, around to help them regulate and figure that out, right? But so the concept that Dr. Hanson put out was that practicing positive mental states, we can strengthen our neural pathways for resilience, happiness, and compassion, right? So again, sitting and practicing with that, practicing gratitude especially. And I'm going to come back to gratitude in a minute. And I have to say these things out loud or I'll forget. So, but a lot of that has to do with the brain's negativity bias, right? Because humans are hardwired for survival. Our brain says, we're going to do what we need to do to survive. And sometimes that doesn't make logical sense to other people, right? And so we are really good at taking in large amounts of information about things that might kill us. And so we hold on to that stuff. The problem is we don't hold on to the things that will save us. We just hold on to those things and say, oh, that's a threat, that's a threat, that's a threat. And so through these patterns, we develop oftentimes, negative patterns to help us deal with that anxiety, with that stress, with that thought of a threat, because one time in our life, it worked, and at some point, it usually stops working. Sure, that alcohol made me feel great for about 5 minutes or a couple hours. 20 years later, it's not feeling so good. Eating that cookie because I was depressed made perfect sense. I felt better for, maybe an hour until I came down from the sugar high, right? So, our brains develop these patterns that are very short-term and very succinct and don't think about the long-term. It doesn't care about the long-term consequence. It cares about dealing with what happens right in the moment. Again, which is a great thing for Zen because we need to be in the moment. So, what Dr. Hanson also emphasizes is deliberately savoring the positive experiences. So when something is going well, today, for instance, for me, I got to spend all day with my nephews. I love them. They are my entire world. They are driving me crazy. Fuck right now, go. But they're in the other room, so I try to say that. But I love them very much. And we had a very good day. And we got to spend things. And so I'm mentally trying to prepare myself to remember that and not the fact that they're driving me crazy right now. They are 13 and 9 for people who don't know. And so it's not their fault. It's not at all. So I'm trying to just remember and take in those positive moments so that I can help encode my brain to, this is why I do love them, right? I can leave the children aspect of it, teenage aspect of it over here, and I can just remember that I love them, and so that can go into my long-term memory instead of, man, I want to punch them right now. He also talked about needing to meet the 3 core needs of safety, satisfaction, and connection. So feeling secure, feeling content, and feeling loved and valued. And I think a lot of times these things don't get brought up in psychotherapy enough, is that especially that connection piece. There is a lot of talk about cutting off people in your life. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. If they're toxic and whatever, but what are you replacing them with? What are you connecting to, or whom are you connecting to if you're cutting all of these people out, right? And so are you connecting to yourself? Are you connecting to nature? Are you connecting to other people, healthy, supportive people, right? And again, I think this is where many psychotherapy sessions go wrong, is they don't emphasize the need for connection in order to heal and change. Humans are social animals. The human experience is a social experience. We're not, I always say, you can't get well in a system that made you sick, but you also can't just get well on your own either. Because what does that look like? How do you know what that is? Your brain is telling you everything's a threat, right? So you need to cultivate connection with people. And so again, Dr. Linehan, in her research and trying to figure, how to help people with addictions and personality disorders and these really significant self-harming behaviors, really pointed out the fact that traditional psychotherapy doesn't really acknowledge your feelings. It just says, stuff your feelings, change your feelings, get over your feelings, but don't just sit with them. And again, that's kind of the key, because how do you learn how to deal with feelings if you're not able to sit and feel them and move through them? And again, this is where Zen can be very helpful, and mindfulness and meditation can be very helpful. And again, I say this with a little bit of an asterisk, because if there are certain things that come up during Zazen or meditation for you, you might need to back off of that a little bit. But, really getting into your practice really challenges your ability to be able to sit with those feelings and to work through those feelings and to say, hey, this is something that I might need to explore with somebody who can help me. I don't know who that is. It could be a friend, depending on the situation. It might need to be a therapist. It could be a priest. It could be a family member, whoever. Like, I'm not here to say who needs to help you with that, but acknowledging for yourself that you're experiencing that and naming it. We also say name it to tame it. Like, if you don't even know what you're experiencing, or why you have butterflies in your stomach, or why you might have a headache every time you have to go see Uncle Joe, or why you get a cough every time you need to go and do something difficult. There are cues that our body tells us that are when our brain is feeling a threat. But a lot of times, people who've experienced trauma, especially, but also other people, if they're not taught how to recognize their own signs and symptoms of emotions, don't know that those two things are connected. That, oh, this feeling in the pit of my stomach is actually a bad feeling. It's warning me of something. What is that? Right? And so approaching that with a curiosity and saying, hey, I wonder why that's happening every single time I do that. And acknowledging it, like, oh, I might be experiencing some anxiety. I have to go to this family function and I really don't want to go. I am getting sick to my stomach right now. This is Ollie. Are you okay, Ollie? Okay, good. Sorry about that interruption. But where was I? Okay, so that connection with mind and body and understanding those feelings and how it goes, working through that with somebody and starting to understand that for yourself, that you're experiencing certain things is really important. And again, not enough time is usually spent on that in psychotherapy. One of the things that I was taught is to never ask somebody how they're feeling or how something makes them feel. And I have gotten away from that because I don't agree with that any longer because I want to know how somebody feels about something. Or I do also, guys, can you please hush? So, but I want to know how they're feeling about it. I want to know what their experience is. And thoughts are part of that for sure. But being able for them to name their feelings is really important. I had a client recently who couldn't figure out why they couldn't stand to be around their mother's boyfriend. And so through like a series of techniques, we finally got to the root of it. And he was finally able to say, it's because I feel abandoned by my mom when he's around. And then we went through all of those things. But he came in then the next session and he's like, you know what? Things have been a lot better since I figured that out. It was just the act of being able to name, finally sit with it and name, this is what I'm feeling, and to have the understanding. And we did that through a lot of guided meditation, honestly, to get to that point. So, the other thing that I think gets overlooked a lot in therapy is how people react instead of respond, right? And so practicing understanding what you're feeling, then what you're going to do about it. But in the meantime, being able to sit with that discomfort in that space, so it's not like an immediate impulsive reaction or potentially a harmful reaction to yourself or someone else. Again, I think that's where Buddhism can really, lend a hand is to be able to sit with that discomfort. Because once I feel somebody has harmed me in some way, that feels icky, and I want to do something about it. Many times I want to do something that I should not be doing. And so I need to give myself space. I need to be able to sit with that discomfort and work through that discomfort and give myself time to decide how is the best way to approach this. Because sometimes in the end, the answer really is do nothing. But not everybody is comfortable with that, right? And so it can be really important. But again, that takes practice, sitting down and practicing with do not react, take some time and actually respond. I do this a lot in couples work too, is that I hate Dr. Phil for so many reasons, and I won't get into that here, but he's not always wrong. And so he has this, in one of his books, I don't remember which one, it doesn't matter. He talks about the concept of right fighting, right? So when you're in conflict with somebody, if you're both fighting to be right instead of to be understood, then you're not really accomplishing much. And this is why conflict continues and continues and continues, right? Because if you need to say, I am right, and until you acknowledge that I am right, we cannot move past this, you're probably not going to get very far, because people then tend to dig their heels in, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you're right. That's not the point. But the point is being able to separate yourself from the behavior and the relationship, and give yourself space to be like, what would be the healthiest way to respond here that might actually create a win-win situation, right? And so again, I think being able to sit with that discomfort and to be able to maybe walk away from a disagreement for a period of time to gather your thoughts is really important. And a lot of people can't do that, right? They can't sit with that uncomfortable feeling, because we've been just conditioned in our society that if you're uncomfortable, do something about it. and that's not always the right thing to do in the moment. So we need to we need to, I think, do better in general as a society. I mean, I won't get on my soapbox about society and mental health right now, but because that'll take days. But as far as Buddhism goes, being able to connect to a breath, to give yourself space, to be able to sit with discomfort, to be able to ground yourself, to be able to come back to your body when you're feeling enraged. I don't know man, if I am really enraged, I don't even know where I am, who I am. I will say whatever. And so to be able to take a breath and be like, oh wait, I am here in this body right now. I don't need to do X, Y, or Z. But if you are practicing that, even just a couple minutes a day, when my clients practice those things, even a couple minutes a day, they're starting to build those positive neural pathways, right? And so it becomes easier and easier the next time. And so when they're actually faced with a conflict, I love when they come back and say to me, you know what? I just didn't even respond. I said, okay. I love when I hear that. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I have this lovely 70-year-old client who, for all intents and purposes, her job has just been to take care of everybody in her family her whole life. And she was really bothered by something her daughter-in-law had said to her. And she couldn't let it go. And so she's been coming to me for like a year and a half, and we've been practicing, loving kindness meditation a lot. That one goes a very long way. And we've also been working on, just, okay, what is it that you need in this moment? What are you missing here? Like what about this interaction with your daughter-in-law is not meeting your needs, right? And so when we finally figured it out, she said, she said something nasty to me the other day. She's like, I said, okay. And I walked away, and I was like, and she just said it very nonchalantly. I said, we're going to go back to this. Like, do you know how huge that is? I said, a year ago, you couldn't do that. And she's like, huh, you're right. I said, so being able to just say, it's not a big deal, walk away, and walk away is a really, really good thing. So, again, it's building those neural pathways. I think everybody can agree that 2020 was kind of a shit year, right? At least it was for me. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was to work with some researchers out of San Francisco, I believe. No. It was actually UCLA. There were these two doctors who were doing research on gratitude, basically. And so we had to meet like once a week for a month, and then once a month for 6 months, something like that. But every single day we had to keep a log of at least one moment of awe. So something in our daily life, it could be a small thing, it could be a big thing, that we could look back and go, wow, that's really awesome, right? And so, and the purpose of the study was to look at, in this really crappy time, one, can you still find those good moments? And two, when you focus on those good moments, not the bad, what happens? And they proved their hypothesis that when you focus on the good and not the bad, that you do feel better, And so again, it's rewiring the brain, creating those neural pathways to say, ooh, these positive things are really happening in this really awful time, And that was not an easy thing to do at that time. Trust me. But, so again, in reading all of this in 2020, that's when I really started to practice Buddhism. That's when I finally, became a member of the temple and really kind of dug into the practices. And like I said, 2020 was rough. I almost died that year, literally. And it was because of my practice that I was able to just kind of roll with it. And understanding that there was still a lot of good going on in that time. Like for me, it really helped me solidify some really positive relationships in my life. And it really helped me solidify what was important to me in my life. I didn't get Ali, who's bouncing around here like a crazy person, I didn't get to see him very much because they lived in Columbus. And so I didn't get to see him. Spencer, I got to see all the time because they lived down the street. So, but it was harder, to get time with Ali. And at the time he was only 3. So, that was really hard. But Zoom platforms like this really helped that too, right? With that connection, with that understanding that, all over the place, no matter where we were, no matter if we couldn't be in person, we could still, get together and talk and do things virtually, which was amazing. And because again, in such a difficult time, what did I need? I needed community. What did the people around me need? They also needed community. And so, I mean, 2 of my coworkers and I used to just get on Zoom and we played, what's that? Categories? Because apparently there's like online categories game. We would do that for hours, but it was like that sense of normalcy that we had during that time. And so again, it was looking for ways to still connect, to find the positive, to just kind of embrace the change that was. It made me rethink a lot of things. And there's still things that I have to go back and remind myself of from time to time because old brain likes to take over and and fall into those negative patterns again. But another book that I read was called Buddha's Brain. I don't remember who wrote it. I didn't write it down, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But it took a lot. It talked about like a lot of the same concepts. The one thing that I found different about this book is it talked about how suffering is created, and how it's not just from the experience happening. And we say this in trauma therapy too. It's not just the experience that happened, because 2 people can have the exact same horrible experience happen, but one is incredibly traumatized and one is not. And a lot of that has to do with perspective and how you can see things and how you process information. And again, a lot of it goes back to, do you have healthy connections in your life to help you through it? Do you have people who can help build you up and not continue that anxiety loop? Does anybody else have people in their life who make their anxiety worse? Because I do. And I'm usually my own worst enemy on that, but it is there. And so, that perception. And so again, the company you keep helps influence that perception, right? And if you're around people who are very negative, it can very likely lead you to seeing something in a negative light rather than a positive light. That doesn't mean that negative experiences are positive, but how you can look at them is, the Buddhist brain also talks about the Velcro versus Teflon effect. Negative experiences stick like Velcro, and then positive experiences go away like Teflon. And so do you have Velcro people or do you have Teflon people? So you kind of need to ask yourself that as well. Then the final book that I had been reading, and this one I actually read more recently because it was actually the way that I came to this book. Oh, now I have to find it. Sorry. Was through a client who received the book for Christmas. And she was having a really, really difficult time getting through it. And so what I said was, okay, well, I'll buy the book and we'll go through it together, a chapter at a time. I will help you figure this out. This is a book of overthinking, right? And the book is called Don't Believe Everything You Think. And so I got about a chapter in, and I said to her, I said, okay, I'm understanding why it is that you can't get through this. Because it's very Buddhist based. It's very heady and very philosophical and very difficult to manage those big heady thoughts if you're not in practice of it, right? And so I said to her, I said, okay, we're going to forget everything in the first 6 chapters. I want you to skip to chapter 7. So any of you who ever want to read this book, skip to chapter 7, because that's where it has the practical step-by-step things you can do to help calm your mind and not overthink so much. A lot of it is understanding that overthinking really is unnecessary, and that's a habit, right? That's a habit that you've created at some point, to overanalyze. And so he talks about trusting your intuition way more than analyzing things. One of my core issues with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is that you cannot logic your way out of feeling, right? So if you're experiencing really distressing emotions, it doesn't matter how much you try to tell yourself that it's ridiculous. Your nervous system does not care. Your nervous system says, nope, it's a threat. Therefore, we're going to treat it like a threat. Your logical mind can be coming in and saying, oh, no. But it doesn't matter. The nervous system is going to win every single time until you learn how to calm your nervous system. And so, again, that can be done through meditation. And, Kelly's here, so forest bathing is a great way to do that. And I know she's seen some really good results with that. Any kind of bilateral movement, running, swimming, walking, helps calm the nervous system as well. And there's a lot of brain science around why that happens. Also, because when you've experienced, a traumatic event, the corpus callosum, which connects your right and left hemispheres of your brain, actually narrows. And so by doing any kind of bilateral movement or stimulation, so whether this is the core behind EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, but any kind of bilateral movement where you can connect your right and left hemisphere helps to expand that corpus callosum so your logical mind and your emotional mind can communicate better. So there's actual neuroscience behind why a lot of these things work. So, breath work is a good thing. And again, spending time in nature, spending time with people who calm you and not hype you up. But what I mean by hype you up is like get you negatively excited or anxious or, but when you're spending time around those people, that can actually help, lower the temperature and calm the nervous system. And so again, when you're in a room full of people who are meditating, it's really difficult to be like hyper aroused. Not that it doesn't happen, because if you're spending too much time in here, then that's going to happen, but, or it can happen. But, being around a bunch of people who are calm and compassionate and living in a meaningful way, in an intentional way, can really go a long way to just, creating a better environment for your mind to process and deal with things. So despite whether you're in formal therapy or not, there are practices, in Buddhism that you can do. And again, it's giving back, it's compassion, showing compassion for others, showing compassion for yourself. It is doing, whether it be breathing exercises or meditative exercises, gratitude exercises, giving yourself something to support those positive neural connections instead of the negative. I keep going back to anxiety because that's what I struggle with. I understand there are other emotions. I really do, I promise. But again, it's being able to connect what it is you're thinking and feeling with how you're behaving and how you're showing up in the world, right, is a really important thing. And I think that the best way to do that is through this Buddhist practice. And so that is my very long-winded way of saying this is how I came to be Shozo. Thank you for your time.